Welcome to the weekly finance meeting of the commissioners. Today, November 15th, 2023, appointed hour 1:30 p.m. is arrived. So we will begin with calling the meeting to order and providing opportunity for public comment.
This is my first meeting, guys, I guess.
Oh.
If you just look at the presentation, just say or not.
There are no attendees.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, very good. That'll move us to item 3. We have the minutes in hand of the meeting of November 8th, 2023.
Move to approve the minutes of November 8th.
A second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, brings us to topics of discussion for today. We have 2 bullet point items here. Financial Analysis Committee question and answer. Dana Best and Tammy Vendor with us to address additional questions in regards to preliminary budget numbers that were provided to us. So the floor is open.
Good afternoon. Do you want to handle the same way we have? We'll answer the questions we've already had, and then you can ask additional questions. Does that work for everybody? So I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about some of the controls that we have in the budget to control spending currently, and some of the things that we're going to do next year to help enhance them. Currently, every purchase over $500 requires a purchase order or a contract, unless it is exempt. And examples of exempt purchases would be like a court order mandate from the courts. Our capital and non-routine purchases over $5,000 go through the capital process and receive additional scrutiny. We have conference forms that are used for conferences and food. And I'll talk about some changes that we're going to make in the future in a couple of minutes. And we have contingency budgeting. We pull things out of the budgets like extra court cases. Like if they think they're going to have more, we pull money into a contingency and we provide that budget later if it's needed, but not if it's not needed. We also do our capital budgeting that way. Nobody gets their capital except for facilities and grant funded departments until it's approved, and then we move the capital into their budget. We also have line item control of the budget. It's a little more complicated than its categories, but basically if you go to put a purchase order, a purchase requisition in, and you have no budget, you can't go any further. So it is a very important control. Some of the new things that we're in the process of discussing and changing are monthly information meetings between us. And in those meetings, talk about the direction of different things you would like to see throughout the year, updates on the state of the county, where are we financially, and process changes. Like what are we working on, what's working and what's not. At the department head meeting in December, we will have additional conversations with department heads. We started last month with the state of the county and things that they can do to help us out in making changes. Stacy and I are talking about lots of different changes. One of them is the conference form. It is very old, it is very outdated, and we use it for a lot more than just the conferences. So we want to revamp that and make sure we're capturing everything we need to capture in that. And again, that's handled similarly to the other purchases. If it's a conference or food that's over $500, it comes through the Stacy for approval. If it's under the $500, the department head can approve it. So we do have some tight controls on that. We're going to also look at our rental car leasing. We do use rental cars in a lot of departments, but we're going to look at who's using it, who's not, expand training, and potentially make it mandatory to use that if it is a cheaper alternative. We'll also review the usage of office supplies and have departments look at what they're doing. Is there anything they can do to curb their expenses, especially in the paper realm, but also in reusing items like binder clips, binders and the clips and different things like that. Stacy and I are also going to conduct a review of the county projects and see what can be postponed, not done at all, and bring those forward to the Board of Commissioners, and what needs to continue. And for next year's budgeting process, we're also going to add operational meetings to the process itself, and it'll include this Stacy, the finance office, and the department, and it'll be linking the budget and the operations together. Right now, the finance team does the budget and we do operations separate. We're going to try to marry those up a little bit. And so now I'm gonna turn it over to Tammy to talk about the different scenarios that Vincent requested.
Okay, so for option number one, increasing the salary and benefits for 2024. So basically, it was just taking away the step increase that people would get in 2024. And then in 2025, it was pay increases, cut them by 50%, and that was for all non-union employees, because we can't touch union contracts. We picked 5 positions. We picked a 5-factor grade of 114, step 7 and 8, kind of averaged it out. And that came up to about $500,000. We were using 9 million of the one-time monies. We didn't include any of the nursing home monies. It was just the fund balance management and the unallocated. And we cut operating and capital by 5%. And then we added in $500,000 of revenue for the grant administrator position. And in 24, that gives us 90 days of fund balance. And the rest of them are listed there for you. So we jump to option number 2. The only thing that changes is we cut operating and capital by 10%. So in the first scenario, it was 5, second it's 10. And that brought 24 up to 95, almost 96 days of unassigned fund balance. And the rest of them are listed there for you. Option number 3. I had to remember what the difference is. The $9 million of the fund balance, we split that between 24 and 25. So if we took option number 1, where we had all the money in 2024, this option spread it between 24 and 25, which gave us about 76 days of fund balance.
Say that again.
So the $9 million of the one-time money, the fund balance management and the unallocated money. In the first option, we kept all that in 2024. Option number 3, we split that and spread that evenly between 24 and 25. And that had the 5%. Everything else was basically mirroring option number 1. And then we get down to option number 4. It's really the same as 2, just splitting that $9 million between 24 and 25. And then option 4, it gets us 81 days of fund balance in 2024.
So it seems we would use, we have 16 million. If we used the 9.3 in 1 year versus 2, we seem to get better results. So that would be option
1 and
2 and 4.
4 has it split between the 2. 1 and 2 keeps it all in
1
21.
and 2, excuse me. Yes, thank you.
Any other questions on those? We can take other questions.
So we've talked about the state budget and how we do not have a state budget and what an effect that has on counties. Dana, the last time that this happened, where we don't have a state budget, how long did that go, and how did the county adapt to not having that funding from the state?
So how we handled it the last time, they were proposing a dramatic cut, not just a hold standard. So in that case, we actually estimated the cuts. This time, we estimated a break even,
Okay,
which increased the subsidy dramatically, which is a lot of the pressure point that is happening here. It's not all of it, but it is a substantial amount of pressure. That and the public safety project adding the
Right.
additional debt.
right.
And their subsidy isn't keeping pace either. So again, waiting for that regulation to see where their funding is going to be, whether it's going to stay stagnant, increase, or God forbid not.
Or
be
go
approved.
away.
If it goes away, that's not in this scenario. And any of the scenarios that we've done.
Right. So it is incredibly important that the state gets us the finalized budget. That is a huge sticking point. I'll say it over and over again, we're an instrumentality of the state. They tell us the things that we need to do, and they're supposed to be delivering the funds to pay for it, and they have not done that. And that does not look like it's anywhere in sight. So I have another question, being that I have not been here for this scenario. And I am wondering, as we get into next year, I know that in January, a new board can go ahead and open a budget back up and look at it. And it seems as if we will spend significant time next year based upon what you've outlined, based on the fact that there's a new board coming, really and truly looking at how we handle the budget, how we handle operations, and how we marry the two. As we get into the year, once we get past that January date, is there any opportunity to alter the budget for 2024?
I'm going to answer it a couple of ways.
Okay.
There is the opportunity in January to reopen the budget with the new board. There is always the ability to do resolutions throughout the year. The only time that you can adjust the millage is during the budget season. So it can also be done in January, but the other parts of the budget can be increased and decreased throughout time.
And when you say resolutions, are you talking about the resolutions that we do when we move money around?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, when you're seeing them in the meetings, that is either increasing revenue, or decreasing the bottom line of the revenue or the bottom line of the expenses.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
I had checked with Keith today about, when you put the budget on display, can you make changes? What's the procedure? And I should have brought his email with me, but I'll read what he said as part of the county code. If any revision of the proposed budget is made after it has been published, such that the estimated expenditures in the adopted budget would be increased more than 10% in the aggregate, or the proposed budget is made available for public inspection, such revised budget shall not be adopted with any such increases therein unless it be again made available for public inspection and for protest of such increases for a period of at least 10 days after notice to that effect is published as hereinbefore provided. I take that to mean that if you make an adjustment under 10%, you don't have to go through all this again. And our budgeted expenses for 2024, Dana, are over 100 million, roughly 106 million.
It is the total county budget,
Oh, okay.
and that's well over 200 million.
308.
All right. So
308 million.
all right. So we would have to make a change in excess of $30 million in expenses for us to go through this.
Correct.
So, okay. I don't see that happening under the worst circumstance, but
Well, and if I read it correctly, it's an increase, so you can decrease
you can
it.
decrease, yeah. The increase. So me personally, I would be in favor of, I'm gonna get ahead of myself, so I'm not gonna, the board might have other questions. I do not at this point.
I don't have any further
You
questions.
answered addressed what I addressed. So thank you so much.
I do have a few questions. So Dana, let me ask for sake of clarity here. We've heard the term contingencies thrown around. So, and there are numerous contingencies from what I understand.
Yes.
So we do not have a singular rainy day fund. So our rainy day fund is basically made up of a hodgepodge of contingencies. True.
So when you look at a rainy day fund, typically from a government standpoint, they normally have a a reserve fund external to the general fund. Our rainy day fund is fund balance and our assigned fund balance and stuff. Most of it, with the exception of some of our self-insurances and stuff, is housed within the general fund. So the assigned fund balance is our rainy day fund. It's also our measure for cash flow in the first 4 months of the
Okay,
year.
so it's all in the numbers that we're given. There's not
Yes.
numbers kept off book.
And if you go to, no, we have no off the book money. Well, we have no off the book money that the commissioners control. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. In our book on page and the appendix that we had given out previously, page 7 is the list of in the fund balance. I don't know if you can get there quick enough. Spot, right?
Yeah. He's doing very well.
He is. He's very good at usually reading my mind, which is scary. There we go. So it lists out all the fund balance that's in the general fund. We have to, like the reserve for the prepaids, that's money that's already spent. That's just a requirement of the financial reporting that we have to reserve that fund. We have the restricted fund balance. They are restricted from an external source. Then we have the assigned fund balance. And the future budgetary requirement, that is a requirement of the presentation. That's when we talk about unassigned fund balance, we use that future budgetary requirement plus the total unassigned to get our, what we consider our unassigned. And then the committed fund balance is the fund balance that the commissioners committed. And the commissioners are the entity that have to uncommit that funding. Or if you design it for a specific purpose, as we spend that money, we can pull it out. And so that is basically our funds that are available.
Okay, help me understand this, this discussion regarding state budget. Now, there was a preliminary budget adopted. We're missing fiscal code, which is, I guess, the enabling. But what's the marginal impact of that on our projections? Are we talking about we really don't know what our budget is without that, or is it?
So the way the state is managing it currently is we are receiving our allocations based on the same levels as the past. So until the fiscal code is approved, we have flat fund.
So we budgeted everything based on flat funding.
Correct.
Okay.
Or what they know they're going to receive, like there are some funding sources that we know are going to flow therein, but the majority, like MHIDD, they don't know if that additional $2-3 million is going to be funded at this point.
But
So we do not have it in, but one of our scenarios did show if it is fully funded, this is what it would look like.
Okay, are we aware of any of the existing data that shows that the state would fund? Are we funding less in some things? Are they funding more in some things? Or are they mostly offering to fund more, but simply not locked in?
I believe that MH has said flat funding.
Okay,
And children and youth is needs-based, so that's very different.
so how close are our numbers to what we think may actually happen?
Based on what we know now, I would say they're very close.
Okay. All right. I have one other question. So now I went through, we did get some newer numbers and I recalculated some of what I calculated over the old numbers. So if I'm reading this right, I just want to be sure I'm reading this right. The expenditures for general fund, 133 million 447, 806.
133, 447, 806.
Okay,
Yes.
that's the revenue 92, 505, 424.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a difference of 40,942,382. That is not funded by projected revenue.
Correct.
Okay,
But we also have over 20 million coming out of the assigned and committed fund balance. And that is, the majority of that is the county grant programs. Because we received the ARPA funding in a previous year.
okay. So my question, let me finish this line, I think.
Okay.
Amy. So how does that number compare to other years when we have drawn from reserves, which is most years?
So we always go back to our projections.
Yeah.
Because we normally do have a difference between revenues and expenses.
Yeah.
Because we budget with the contingencies in and we show them
Yes.
at the full value. But departments don't have access to that money. So we don't expect to spend all of the money that's in the budget. We project what our expected expenditures are.
Okay. Expected percent. Okay.
Yeah, since I've been here, Dana, the actual expenses are less than projected.
Correct. Correct. And we keep an eye on that. And if there's a shift in what we're seeing, we immediately tell the board.
Yeah, no, I
We
understand.
do it quarterly.
It's important though.
Yes, yes. And that's why when we're presenting, we always show what the budget is and what our projections are side by side. So that you can see what the expectation is versus what's in the budget.
So what's the purpose of you were mentioning earlier, I believe this this monthly update or something of that nature?
I think it's going to be determined by the Board of Commissioners on where it will go.
Okay.
I envision starting it with potentially just talking about what we do, how we do it, going into more of the details of behind how we do our projections, let you see what we're doing, just to give a better comfort level of what's going on. And just more informational. And then from guidance from the Board of Commissioners, what do you want to see and hear from us? We keep our eye on things throughout the year and we just throw them up the chain when something's going really wrong. Right? But if something's going really, really right, we should be shouting it too. So it's more, what does the board want from us?
What's your understanding of it was 2009 when we went through this before, when we instituted the weekly finance meeting? What's your understanding of what the purpose of the weekly finance meeting is?
Well, the weekly finance meeting is the opportunity for departments to come in. And it's really to talk about their operations and what's going on and how that's going to impact your decisions, because the operational aspect of the county turns into money eventually. So it's to come in and give you more information than the time that's allotted in the workshops or the commissioners' hearings now. So if I have a major project that's coming in, I'll schedule it to talk about that. We also bring financial information forward a few times a year. But it is intended, in my opinion, to be an opportunity for the commissioners to hear more about the aspect of what's going on at a more detailed level. Anything you wanted to add to that?
So this figure of 40,942,382 is not a surprise to you.
It's not a surprise to me, but I like it, but it's not a surprise.
Okay.
The following year you have, I think the expenses are dropping, correct? To like 100 and I don't have my full packet with me.
I believe there is a decrease.
There's a decrease in revenue. And there's a lot of grants in and out of the general fund, and I don't want to pick on Kirk, but he has some big grants. When they get done, then they're drawing out on me. He's got a fish and wildlife, it's like $1 million and watershed is a big watershed grant too. So some of those, I have to be very careful when we're doing the projections that they're coming out of revenue. I have to make sure they're coming out on my expense side too. So there's a lot of notes in the spreadsheets and on my papers. I have it in both of them. I have it out. I have it out. But we have to be very careful because there are a lot of big grants coming in and out. We had the emergency rental assistance program. Well, that one's done. I have to watch to make sure I've got them in or out in both places because it's all money coming in and out. They all net out to zero. But I do have to be careful when I'm in the projections. And sometimes that's why I can see a dip is because I know it's the grant money coming in and out.
So how are you confident in our ability to track those obviously you can track them over the long term, but in terms of just idea of monthly being able to operationalize projections, there's a sentiment by the board to pursue grants to a much more aggressive degree. And if we're doing that, we're obviously going to have a lot more tracking to do.
They all sit in their own accounting unit. So
Anyway,
they sit in separate accounting units.
okay.
In departments in Lawson. So it's very easy for us to go in and I know this one's a grant accounting unit, this one's a grant accounting unit.
So we would be able to track that easily, would not distort, for instance, monthly tracking of budget compliance.
I think so. We actually even went in West ago and we have a mark too, which accounting units are granted. So it makes it easier when we're sorting and grouping data that we can tell which ones are which.
Okay.
Dana, just to clarify, you said it, but I'm just not sure that the board heard the emphasis on it. Is it a correct statement that at least half of the gap in the 2024 projection is based on revenue that came in a previous year? So a substantial portion of the expenditure in the projections for 2024 is based on revenue that came into the county prior to 2024, i.e. our ARPA monies that are going out in 2024, but the monies came in previously, which is why I believe Commissioner DeFilippo asked about why there was such a difference in the expenditures between the the figures that you have showing.
Yeah, in the budget document, there's a $20 million. In the projections, it's a little less because we pulled the ARPA money out of the projection. It was a grant. We pulled both the revenue and expense out. Well, there's no revenue, the expense out because we transfer it to another fund. But we have to have it in the budget because it's part of the process. It didn't overinflate the expenses more, is basically what we did.
Dana, in the examples I sent you, the options here,
Yes.
just for clarity. There's a line that says gap between revenue and expense. For 2023 is 4.2 million. 2024 it's 1.7 million. Under option 1, can you explain that?
What the difference is?
Compared to the 40 million that Commissioner Eichelberger brought up, which is an accurate number based on the description of how it's presented.
In the $40 million is the difference between the revenues and expenses that will be published in the budget. When we apply the projections and all of the all of the movement out of the assigned and committed fund balance. This, what we're calling the gap between revenues and expenses, it's truly
Okay.
the decrease in fund balance.
When we do the projections, most departments can't spend their budget down to the last penny because of the controls and losses. So I know there's a little extra sitting in budget, but if they don't have the budget in there to process, it will hang them up when they're trying to get invoices and stuff paid.
More importantly, when they're trying to do a requisition, so they can't even order the supplies.
It'll stop them.
Was that helpful?
Yes, yes. That's what I thought it was, but I just wanted to hear it from you.
Gary, did that answer your question?
Somewhat, it triggered additional questions, but that's okay.
You're okay.
Yes, but I'm gonna say what you said and confirm. The gap between revenue and expense is truly the decrease in fund balance.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. And we should probably update that spreadsheet to say decrease in fund balance. Any other questions?
I don't have any at the moment.
I don't either, not at the moment.
Thank you.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I guess that ends the Q&A. So then discussion regarding the potential of the preliminary budget.
We're requesting to potentially put the budget on view.
And if we do that, Dana, we could make that motion by including potentially option 1, 2, 3, or 4. Correct.
Yes, but let me restate that to make sure I understand what you're saying. If you give us direction to place it on view and implement one of these, yes, but we have to put the specific numbers on view.
Right. So you have to decipher what you've given us.
Yeah, we would have to actually go in and make the change to the numbers.
How long does that take? Does the clock start running?
Yeah. Well, what we would have pieces. Yeah, the salaries.
It would take a little bit longer. We gotta redo the tables. We've got contingency line we can use. To balance it.
We can make it work.
Day, a week?
If you gave us direction to do it, we wouldn't be able to go in and do it at the line item level quickly, but we could go in there and put, like a negative salary, a negative contingency. We could pull them down and then we would have to allocate it before it goes on. It's finally approved. So what it's gonna show is my department finance will show my salaries, but it will have a negative salary in there. Right.
That nets it to the current level.
Yeah, that would net it to the no increases in the salaries. And then for operating, we could simply go in and reduce. Just put a negative line item. We would have to go in and amend it before we give departments access. We'd have to specifically hit what line items it would be. because that would be a generic reduction.
Dana, do you know off the top of your head what CPI is today?
3.2.
And this freezing of salaries and benefits, I want to make sure that we're very clear about this, because our employees will need to be very clear about this as well as us. So this is not affecting, if I'm understanding correctly, it's not affecting the salary increases we just gave.
Correct.
Okay, those hold steady, and if I remember correctly from one of your pages, that increase is not what has created a problem. It is operating expenses that have created an issue in this budget.
It is the things that we've been forecasting were going to happen for the previous, I don't know how many years, but we have the P25 project. We didn't foresee the 911. Well, we did foresee that 911 was going to shift, but we thought it was going to shift a little earlier. MHIDD, we didn't foresee that the state wasn't going to increase. Like, there are so many things that are happening that have additional pressure points.
So salaries and wages are not part of operating budget.
They are part of operating budget.
What percentage of it?
Probably close to 50%.
They're actually less now than they were in 2019. As a
Correct.
percentage of our expense, like 48%. It was 49 or 50. Percentage wise, not dollar.
We kind of keep our eye on it, and it fluctuates usually between 45 and 55%.
So what impact was, we basically shed a whole slew of jobs when we sold the nursing home. So what was the net impact on that?
The nursing home positions weren't in the general fund,
They're not in the general fund,
none of the nursing.
other than the staff time, the chargeback time,
Correct.
okay.
And I will say the difficulty with like a 5% or 10% across the board cut, we have a substantial amount of the operating and capital that just can't be cut. So it would be truly more than a 5% or 10% cut to the things that we could cut. For example, if we're getting a grant, it doesn't make sense to cut the expenses on that grant but the 5 and 10% cut includes all of those expenses.
You've heard me say this before, but flat percentages are a terrible budget anyhow. In terms of cuts, you're penalizing the people who run their expenses close to reality, and you're rewarding the people who pad their budgets. So, plus some things are just more important than other things.
Yes. My personal opinion, it's better to attack it from looking at what we're spending, the procedures, getting department heads on board with making the changes, because in the county, we've been very successful at doing that. When we need to tighten our belt, they normally do a very good job of doing it. When we leave it to them to figure it out. And whether we take their budgets or not, they are usually very good.
I heard something alarming, an alarming comment there. I'm not aware that we have people that are padding their budgets. Okay,
Maybe not anymore. They used to pre-Lawson.
Very much. But the contingency budgeting has been a godsend for us, for lack of a better word. We in the old days, we used to pad our budgets and spend every penny we would get. Now, that wasn't me. I was in a different position then. One of the first things that we started doing in finance was, let's not budget for everything that can go wrong and then spend our budgets. And so by pulling those potential contingent items out, it doesn't give people the ability to pad the way they used to. Oh, we think we might have an extra court case. We're going to put an extra $100,000 in. Well, that sits in our contingency. If you need it, we give it to you. And we watch it close. There have been years where we're out of contingency and it's only March. But most of the time, we don't go through all of it. When we start going through it, you'll start seeing more resolutions. We'll be in going, right now, we're mostly not spending all of our capital budget because we're not able to get it done quick enough. The supplies aren't here, the different things like that. So we normally have had a substantial amount of our capital budget from year to year.
Because there's projects that are budgeted in 24, that they're started now, but they're not getting done until 24. So there's money in 24 for some of the projects.
Dana, you just said a minute ago, your approach would be to do what instead of flat cutting expense? To do what?
I would get departments involved and have them look at what they're doing and what they can cut.
Okay, all right, question then. What would happen, say, in option one, if we did not cut operating and capital by 5%? Or option two,
You mean what, how that would adjust your fund balance?
option one, yes.
We don't have these built into our projections because it's not. We can't pull it up in our spreadsheet and just quickly do it because we had to manually
Can
force
you
this.
at least ballpark it? You can do that, can you?
So the question again was, what,
Eliminate cutting operating and capital by 5%. Everything else the same in option one.
having to write down how much that 5% is.
I can see the difference
It's
between
5%.
5 and 10.
5% of operating. That's 28 million and 5% is 8.
Mhm.
5% 1.8 million. 10% 3.7.
Salary side, nothing gets changed unless you approve it. So not changing that budget really doesn't
Right.
affect.
What I'm saying is, I would be in favor of, say, option one without the cut in operating and capital, but with what you indicated in getting departments to look at their budgets, try to make reasonable cuts. And if we do that, trying to implement a tax increase on that variable, other variables we have, the fact that we're hiring a grant administrator, and I know we put $500,000 of revenue in there. Me personally, I would be okay with putting that budget on display.
I want to follow up on that because
Not understand, I'm
I
just
just-
saying.
no, so the waters got muddied for me. When you said we can't really cut by 5% across the board. We can't really cut by 10% across the board.
If we do that, it's gonna end up being 20% in one area and 0% in another. Because it was a flat 5% across the board. And when you start looking in what we spend in our operating expense, we have some contracted services, like, we're not gonna be able to cut dietary in the prison. So there are just some
Okay.
things you can't cut by 5%. There's some things that are gonna go up anyway.
Your number reflects just an overall 5%.
Correct.
Period. Yeah, that's fine, as far as numbers go.
It's not 5% of budget, it's 5% of the projections. So it would be a 5% of real spending. Put it in perspective, probably the majority of the finance budget is Questica. So we would have to take major cuts out of other things. It's Questica and audit. So it would be training, office supplies. Not sure we could get 10%.
Might be big conferences.
Yeah, we'd have to take. And so that's kind of the perspective. I don't know how much. The true budget there is that we can cut in specific line items.
I
If that makes sense.
understand exactly what you said. Yes.
So here's a question. So how do we actionize this? And what I'm getting at is, for instance, tomorrow, the commissioners will meet with HR in executive session in regarding to salary.
Mhm.
So there's going to be a number of proposals put in front of us again of create a new job, bring somebody in and hire the minimum. And how do we translate any of this into the day-to-day decisions that cumulatively create our true budget? Not the planning document. That's what the budget is, planning document, the action.
Any increases that you would make would increase the salaries.
Okay.
It would be in addition to what we budgeted. Part of what we normally budget in our increases is a natural amount of fluctuation. But if we budget to what exists currently, that's all it is.
Here's a question for you. Is it better to put the 2024 budget as you originally presented it on view? Or better to add one of these options as a contingency to that 2024 budget? And here's why I'm asking, because you've said a lot of things about going to department heads and saying, okay, let's tighten our belts. Let's really think about the things we do, how we do them, who we really need to hire, what we really need to operate. How are we going to provide mandated services within a certain dollar amount? And that seems very like something that's very flowing to me. Okay. And then the other part of me goes, if we put that 2024 budget on review as it exists, it's saying to everyone, we're not really serious about tightening our belts. And I don't want that happening. But I need to know what you think.
If it were my decision, I would put the budget on view as it's stand. And we did make a few adjustments. Hotel tax change, we did, you know, there's a few minor adjustments to what we did. But our department's heads have shown historically that even though we move forward with that, they take it seriously when we say you need to save money. Just a recent example is look at what happened when COVID hit and how departments really stood up and looked at what they could do in their departments to make the adjustments that were needed to get us through. They did it during the state budget impasse. I think we have a lot of very excellent department heads that are willing to work with us and cut where they can cut. I think there's also a lot of departments that really don't have a lot of stuff that they can cut. They already are working very frugally.
But if that budget in its current form is put on display, I believe you are requesting a tax increase for 2024.
There is
There's
no millage change in it.
There was no millage change. It's just the, all right.
There is no millage change.
Thank you.
How many years have expenses been outpacing revenues?
2021 was the first year.
Okay.
And it would have been in 2020 had it not been for constricting what we were spending and the extra one-time monies.
Mhm.
And it would have been substantially more in 21 and 22 if it had not been for the one-time monies that we received.
So again, if I'm reading the state county law, if we display a budget, we can certainly reduce expenditures.
Absolutely.
But if we increase expenditures greater than 10%, which in our case, that 10% would be $30 million. We would have to, I'll call it re-advertise and go through the whole process again.
Right. And we can adjust budget the entire year, so we can decrease it or increase it as long as it, I believe.
But to Gene's point, what we're going to be putting on display is probably not going to be what we approve.
That can happen too. Yes,
This budget has to be approved, I believe, by December 31st.
correct. Yes, we can place it on view and make changes.
To reducing expenses.
Correct. We could increase them too. I mean, that's not what any of us are
I
proposing,
understand.
but
And the meeting to approve the millage will be in December.
yes,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any proposal to make it any different than it currently is.
Right.
Additional questions for today?
Are we ready to move forward with placing the budget on view, or?
Yes, I will make that motion.
And just to clarify, Vince, we're placing the 2024 budget on view as Dana has presented,
Yes, correct. I have a copy of it here.
with no millage increase proposed.
Correct.
I will second that motion.
Okay, it's moving a second. Any additional comment?
Is to clarify that motion, we are making a motion to lay 2024 budget on view as presented with no millage increase.
Okay, no objection from the second, so that's supposed to be an accurate description.
Yeah.
So any further questions? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Please mark me as opposed. Is that what you needed?
Right. Thank you.
Okay, that's all of our topics for discussion today. Brings us to item 5, which is other business. I don't move. Entertain a motion for adjournment.
Make a motion to adjourn.